In this lecture, we're going to explore typecasting. From time to time, you may need to change the data type of an existing value. It's not uncommon to perform this type of action. PHP refers to this type of behavior as typecasting. Typecasting is the process of converting the data type of a value to a different data type. Overall, PHP makes it extremely simple to change data types. Typecasting can be performed by wrapping the new type with parentheses. Afterward, you must provide the value to change. In this example, I'm demonstrating typecasting on a single variable. It's cast into a boolean, integer, float, string, and an array. While typecasting is powerful, the results can be unexpected. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a gist. If you're not familiar with GitHub, that's perfectly fine. GitHub is a resource for sharing code with others. In a future lecture, we're going to have an opportunity to learn more about GitHub. For now, all you need to know is that I'll be using it to share code with you. To prevent the lecture from becoming repetitive, I've decided to provide an entire example of typecasting of various types and values. Copy this entire piece of code to your clipboard. Next, switch over to our project. Inside the index.php file, replace the current contents of the file with the code in your clipboard. Be sure not to replace the opening PHP tags. Otherwise, this code would not work. Alright, let's take the time to understand what's going on. If we look through the code, we are repeatedly calling the variable dump function. The main difference is the value passed into the function. Various values are being typecast. Let's start from the top and work our way down. The first set of examples is non-boolean values being casted into boolean values. We can use the bool keyword to perform this operation. Alternatively, we can type boolean. As an example, the second variable dump function uses the boolean keyword instead of the bool keyword. I prefer to use the shorter version. Let's go through these examples one by one. Strings can be typecasted into booleans. However, that doesn't mean all strings are converted to the same value. Empty strings are considered to be false. If the string contains text, the value becomes true. The exception to this rule is the third example, which is a string with the number 0. On the other hand, if the text says false, the value is casted into true. Moving on to integers and floats. Numbers are set to true when the number is not 0. This includes negative numbers too. If the number is 0, the value becomes false. Even though these examples are integers, the same rules apply to floats. Up next, null and empty arrays are considered to be false. On the other hand, if the array contains one or more items, the value becomes true. It doesn't matter what the contents of the array are. As long as the array has values, the array is converted into true. You can confirm these values in the preview. They should match the values written in the comments. If it's hard to read these values, feel free to add break lines into the output using HTML. Let's move on to typecasting values to integers. Just so that the preview doesn't get cluttered with a bunch of values, I've applied comments to the other examples. I'm going to comment the boolean examples and uncomment the integer examples. Here's a cool trick to instantly apply or remove comments from multiple lines of code. If you were to select multiple lines of code and then press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl//, comments are toggled on the selected lines. For Mac users, this shortcut would be Command/. Alright, values can be typecasted to integers with the int keyword. Alternatively, you can use the integer keyword, which is shown in the second example. However, like the boolean example, I prefer the shorter version. In the first few examples, boolean values are casted into integers. A false boolean is set to 0, whereas a true boolean value is set to 1. If we're updating strings, PHP removes non-numeric characters from the string. For example, a string with the number -1 is set to -1. However, if our string doesn't contain numbers, the default value is 0. What if we have a combination of numbers or characters? Non-numeric characters are removed, leaving us with the number. If we convert a float to an integer, the decimal value is wholly removed. This is important to understand. PHP does not round the value. Numbers to the right of the dot character are removed. If we were to round this value, the result would be 13. However, if you look at the output, the value is 12. Understanding this behavior can be a small gotcha if you're not aware of it. Lastly, a null value is set to 0. Let's move on to the float examples. Similar to before, comment the integer examples and uncomment the float examples. Values can be typecasted to a float with the float keyword. Most of the conversions are similar to integers. If I'm being completely honest, there's nothing new to share. So, let's just move on to the next data type. Comment the float examples, and then uncomment the string examples. Typecasting to strings can be performed with the string keyword. Let's go through the examples. Firstly, a false value is set to an empty string. On the other hand, a true value is set to 1. Integers and floats are converted to strings without stripping numbers from the original value. Basically, PHP just wraps your numbers with quotes. Arrays are a special case. They can be converted, but PHP does throw a warning during this process. It's not able to completely convert an array to a string. All you'll get is the word array. Values inside the array are entirely removed. If you look at the preview, you'll be able to see how they're treated in our script. The word array appears, but a warning is accompanied with the value. Just be aware of this behavior when typecasting arrays. Lastly, a null value is converted into an empty string. That's about it for strings. Let's move on to the last set of examples. Comment the string examples and uncomment the array examples. A value can be typecasted into an array with the array keyword. Array typecasting is straightforward. The value is always inserted as the first item in the array. It doesn't matter if we're working with booleans, strings, integers, or floats. The one exception to this rule is null values. An empty array gets produced for null values. That's about it. You can look at the preview for the final results of typecasting these values. Understanding typecasting is essential. Believe it or not, PHP can automatically typecast your variables without your consent. In the following lecture, let's discuss this feature.